Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will proceed to executive session to resume consideration of the following nomination, which the clerk will report.
Nomination, Department of Justice, Pamela Bondi of Florida to be Attorney General.
President Pro Tempore.
First, a very short unanimous consent request for detailees to be on the floor with me. I ask unanimous consent that Sam Rui and Ivy Benchek, two detailees in my office, be granted 4 privileges for the remainder of Congress.
Without objection.
I come to the floor to speak about the nominee for Secretary of Veterans Affairs that we'll be voting on in a couple hours. I have long considered myself a friend of veterans, the men and women who have put themselves in harm's way to serve our country. They deserve our full support, and they have mine. Too often, I hear from veterans in Iowa that the Department of Veterans Affairs makes it difficult for them to access health care and the services that we honor them with because they have defended our country. Whether this is expecting them to drive an unnecessary distance for their initial disability exam or making it more difficult to seek the care that they choose outside of the VA system, our veterans deserved much better. The VA needs to do better. Which brings me to former Representative Doug Collins, President Trump's nominee to be Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Representative Collins, a veteran himself, recognizes the challenges veterans face with the VA. During his time in the House of Representatives, he was a supporter of giving veterans the choice on where to seek health care. He and I agree that the VA needs to do better by our veterans and taxpayers alike. This became more obvious to the public last year when the VA misled Congress by claiming the department was going to face a shortfall in funding, but in fact ended the fiscal year with a surplus, can you believe this, in the billions. When I heard about this alleged shortfall, I joined my colleagues, led by the junior senator from Alaska, to work to bring more transparency to the VA budget process. As I shared with Representative Collins, I will continue to do so. When we first met in my office, I gave Representative Collins my advice that I give to every nominee coming to the office, because these people come before the committee and one of the questions they're asked, will you answer our letters? And they all say yes, but we know as a matter of fact, that doesn't happen as often as it should. So I suggested him that maybe instead of saying yes, he say maybe, so he wouldn't turn out to be a liar ever. Unlike the former Secretary of VA, who did not feel the need to respond to even a bipartisan letter that I sent in October of 2024 alongside 3 of my colleagues before that secretary departed from his post. Now, Representative Collins understands the importance of being accountable and forthcoming to Congress because he has been a member of Congress. So I thank Representative Collins for his service to our country, and I look forward to voting positively on his nomination. I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
Mr. President, later today, the Senate will vote on the nomination of Pam Bondi to serve as Attorney General. Ms. Bondi is an experienced prosecutor who has earned a reputation as a tenacious lawyer who's tough on crime. In her 18 years as a state prosecutor in Florida's Hillsborough County, Ms. Bondi worked with law enforcement, visited crime scenes, and spent countless hours in the courtroom. Those who know Ms. Bondi have spoken of her toughness and her skill as a prosecutor. They have also spoken of her character, of her willingness to work with anyone to solve a problem, and of her deep commitment to the victims of crime and their families. Mr. President, in 2011, Pam Bondi became Florida's first female Attorney General. At that time, so-called pill mills were a major problem in the state and a major contributor to the opioid crisis. On the campaign trail, Ms. Bondi would hear heartbreaking stories of addiction and loss, and families would give her photos of loved ones lost to the scourge of drugs. As Attorney General, she filled her office with those photos and got to work. She worked with the Florida legislature to pass a bill to crack down on the pill mills, which our colleague, then Governor Rick Scott, signed into law. And that was just the start. She tracked issues like human trafficking, and she worked with her counterparts in other states, regardless of party and politics. She also worked to keep politics out of the important work of enforcing the law in Florida, something she's committed to doing at the Department of Justice if she's confirmed. Mr. President, in recent years, many Americans have lost faith in the Justice Department. They've seen federal prosecutors go after pro-life activists, while attacks against churches have gone unprosecuted. There was Attorney General Garland's infamous memo targeting parents who attended school board meetings, and another infamous FBI memo suggesting traditional Catholics could be violent extremists. Mr. President, the American people should be able to trust that the Department of Justice is not targeting Americans based on their political opinions or religious beliefs. Pam Bondi has promised to get the department back to its core mission, prosecuting crime and protecting Americans from threats to their safety and their freedoms. And I look forward to confirming her later today. Mr. President, the Senate will also soon vote on the nomination of Scott Turner to be Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. This is an important role. Our country's facing a housing crisis affecting big cities, rural areas, tribal lands, literally every part of our country. Higher construction costs and burdensome regulations have made home building challenging. And what homes are on the market are too pricey for many Americans. Many parts of the country have homelessness challenges. Too many distressed communities are struggling to turn their fortunes around. And despite a windfall of additional funding for HUD, these problems are, in many cases, getting worse. Fortunately, Mr. President, President Trump has nominated someone to lead housing and urban development who knows a thing or two about overcoming adversity. Scott Turner grew up in Plano and Richardson, Texas, in challenging circumstances, but he was determined to achieve the American dream. At age 10, he told his mother he would play professional football. With a lot of determination and hard work, he graduated from the University of Illinois and was drafted to play in the NFL. In the 2003 offseason, a time he could have used to take a break, this NFL athlete was interning in a congressional office. And since he hung up his cleats, Scott Turner has spent his time working to make a difference. That's included founding an organization to help children in poverty, serving as a Texas state legislator, and helping to lead the White House Opportunity and Revitalization Council during the first Trump administration. Mr. President, the 2017 Republican tax relief legislation did a lot to help revitalize the economy. One of the things it did was create the Opportunity Zone program championed by our colleague, Senator Tim Scott. It was Scott Turner who oversaw this program for the White House, visiting opportunity zones across the country in an effort to revitalize America's distressed communities. And I'm confident he will bring that same concern for distressed areas to his work as secretary. Mr. President, President Trump has made it clear that we are going to be building things in America again. One of those things we're going to be building is communities. It's a big job, but Scott Turner has the grit, the determination, and passion to get it done. And I look forward to working with him on this important mission. Mr. President, I yield the floor, and I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President,
Democratic Leader.
I ask unanimous, excuse me, I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
So, Mr. President, yesterday, Elon Musk took issues to my warning that DOGE is operating in many ways like a shadow government. Here's what I said. I said, quote, DOGE is not a real government agency. Quote, DOGE has no authority to make spending decisions. Quote, DOGE has no authority to shut programs down or ignore federal law. DOGE's conduct, I said, cannot be allowed to stand. Congress must take action to restore the rule of law. His response, here's what Musk said, quote, hysterical reactions like this is how you know that DOGE is doing work that really matters, and that, quote, this is the one shot American people have to defeat bureaucracy and restore democracy. Give me a break. Nothing screams democracy like having a secret squad of company men pull off a hostile takeover of America's Social Security and tax information in the dead of night. That's democracy? No openness, no hearings, no discussion, no hearing the other side from a small group of limited people who have limited backgrounds, who probably don't even know about the programs they're cutting and how they actually work. Whatever DOGE is doing, it is certainly not what democracy looks like or has ever looked like in the grand history of this country. Because democracy does not work in the shadows. Democracy does not skirt the rule of law. Democracy does not shun accountability and restraint, does not run away from transparency, but welcomes it, and does not give privilege to the needs and even the ideas of a small group of ultra-wealthy people at the expense of working people. They're the only people who seem to be in the room to make the decisions. Working class Americans are excluded. Now, reform is a worthy cause to seek, no question about it. Everyone agrees, and everyone should agree, that we should find ways to improve the effectiveness. We should find ways to improve the efficiency of government. But you know what history shows? When it's done in the dark of night by a very limited group of people of limited experience, it never works. When ideas are not brought into conflict, when people have different views, when there's not debate, when there's not openness, when there's not transparency, things always get messed up. It leads to very bad results, and yet that's just what DOGE is doing. They know better than everybody else. Certainly, they're entitled to have their viewpoint. Certainly. But to just do things in the dark of night, to just fire people without even talking to them, what they do, what their needs are, makes no sense, and again, is going to lead to bad results. We should talk about reform, but we should talk about it the way it's always been done in America, in the halls of Congress, in the public forums of the people's government. That's what the Founding Fathers wanted. If the Founding Fathers were to be like DOGE, a small group of them would get together and just dictate what should have been done in America. It didn't. They set up a Congress. They set up debate. And the American people, mark my words, the American people will not stand for an unelected, secret group to run rampant through the executive branch. Being innovative is good. But Mr. Musk, this isn't a tech startup. These are public institutions that deal with things like Social Security and Medicare and national defense and provide for the well-being of the American people. And the American people have a right to be part of that debate. Part of that debate. The elections occurred, and one viewpoint got a few more votes than the other, but that doesn't mean we throw out democracy. That doesn't mean what's been done for centuries in this country should just go out the window and be substituted by a small group of people who think they know a lot more than the wisdom of the American people. So that is why this week, Leader Jeffries and I will join together to push legislation to prevent unlawful meddling in the Treasury Department's payment systems, to prevent everyone's records from being made available to a small group of people who can look at them at will, when this has always been kept secret and always been protected, your tax returns and your payment systems and things like that. And it affects average Americans. And who knows, maybe next they'll say, let's slash all of this stuff. That's what they seem to want to do in their $2.5 trillion desire to cut government. We must protect people's Social Security payments, their Medicare payments, their tax refunds from any possible tampering by DOJ or any other unauthorized entity. And that's why Leader Jeffries and I will join together to push this legislation. I yield the floor. No.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Republican Whip.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the Justice Department needs a leader who has the qualifications, the experience, the determination, and the moral clarity to keep our nation safe. Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi is that leader. She has my vote and my vocal support. The Attorney General is America's top prosecutor. The role should be filled by an experienced prosecutor. Well, Attorney General Bondi has prosecution experience, a lot of it. She spent almost 30 years as a criminal prosecutor and then a state attorney general. She has more trial experience than any modern-day U.S. Attorney General. Attorney General Bondi is the most experienced career criminal prosecutor ever to be America's chief law enforcement officer. She is ready to lead on day one. In Florida, Attorney General Bondi prosecuted a range of violent crimes and criminals. She locked up the worst of the worst for the worst offenses. Her signature achievements were in fighting illegal drugs and in fighting human trafficking. When she first became Florida's Attorney General in 2011, the state was overrun with things known as pill mills. They were operations that were running to sell opioids. Pam shut them down. She locked up the drug dealers, she pushed for stronger laws, and she stopped the spread of synthetic opioids. Under her leadership, Florida led the fight against this deadly epidemic. Attorney General Bondi also prosecuted victims of human trafficking in Florida. She pledged to make human trafficking an area for her to combat. It was a top priority at her Justice Department in Florida. She is a fierce advocate for safety, and she is a skilled leader. The Department of Justice is a huge agency. It controls 40 separate organizations. It employs more than 115,000 people. It oversees all 94 U.S. attorneys across the country. Leading the DOJ is an enormous undertaking. Pam Bondi is up to the challenge. The Florida Attorney General's office is one of the largest in the nation. It handles a broad scope of civil and criminal investigations, just like the U.S. Department of Justice. She led that office effectively and efficiently, and she will do the same thing now as Attorney General. And she has received overwhelming support from all across the country. More than 100 former senior DOJ officials wrote a letter to the Judiciary Committee in support of Pam Bondi. Here's what they said about her track record. They said, quote, "It shows the no-nonsense, law and order, pro-law enforcement approach that she will bring to the Department of Justice." That's their quote. The Fraternal Order of Police also urged the Senate to confirm Pam Bondi. This is an organization of over more than 377,000 members of law enforcement. She's also earned the support of Second Amendment advocates. U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi will stand in stark contrast to the prior administration's Justice Department. The previous administration gave us two tiers of justice. It labeled parents as domestic terrorists when they attended school board meetings. It brought charges against pro-life protesters, threw them in prison. It worked with left-wing judges and prosecutors to try to throw President Trump in jail. That's what we had in the last administration. This doesn't even begin to get into the Russiagate hoax or covering up for Hunter Biden. In those cases, we saw rogue federal agents try to subvert the democratic process. At her hearing before the Judiciary Committee, Attorney General Bondi promised a different path. Instead of playing politics, Pam Bondi pledged to enforce the law fairly, fully, and faithfully. And she said in her opening statement, she will return the Department of Justice to its core mission of keeping Americans safe and vigorously enforcing the law. Her commitment to the Constitution, to public safety, and equal justice under the law is exactly what our nation needs today. The partisan, politicized, and polarizing prosecutions are now over. Pam Bondi will usher in a new era of safety, of sanity, and of justice. She has my vote to be the U.S. Attorney General. Mr. President, on another matter, today the Senate's going to confirm former Congressman Doug Collins. Congressman Collins is the nominee to be the Secretary of Veterans Affairs. Caring for our veterans is a top priority for President Trump and Republicans. As Abraham Lincoln famously spoke, our nation has a duty to care for him who shall have borne the battle. That's why I'm glad that President Trump has nominated Congressman Collins. Congressman Collins knows what it means to be a veteran because he is a veteran, as are you, Mr. President. He deployed to Iraq as a military chaplain. He visited wounded service members in the hospital. He prayed for them. He comforted them. In Congress, Congressman Collins continued to serve our veterans. He received bipartisan support from the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee. The vote was 18 in favor and only 1 opposed. Looking at his record, it's obvious why. Congressman Collins will improve veterans' access to care, not get in the way. He will also address the alarming rate of veteran suicide and homelessness. As he told the committee, we will not stop until we succeed on behalf of the men and women who have worn the uniform. Congressman Doug Collins will pursue his mission with duty and with devotion. He has my full support. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor. Absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a statement. Are we in quorum call?
Yes,
I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
without objection.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a statement regarding my vote in committee to, on behalf of Robert F. Kennedy to be the Secretary of HHS. First, I thank everyone who has contacted me over the last few days. Almost all have been respectful and seek the best for our country. And I've been contacted by text, by phone, by email. And if I didn't respond to anyone, it was not to be rude. It's just I was getting hundreds of messages a day personally and thousands through the office. And I just physically could not. Now, Mr. President, believe it or not, of these hundreds of people calling me and contacting me, however they did, many of them disagreed with each other, diametrically. Three-dimensionally, they disagreed. But the unifying factor is that they all desire the best for our country, even though they differ from each other so much. And maybe that kind of frames my feelings about this nomination. For context, before entering politics, before ever thinking about running for political office, I practiced medicine for 30 years in a public hospital for the uninsured, caring for those who otherwise would not have been able to afford the access to the care that I provided. After seeing patients die from vaccine-preventable diseases, I dedicated much of my time to vaccine research and immunization programs, personally witnessing the safety monitoring and the effectiveness of immunization. Put simply, vaccines save lives. This is the context that informed me when considering RFK as the nominee to be Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services. It was a decision I studied exhaustively. I took very seriously. And as I said I would, I spoke with Mr. Kennedy not once, but multiple times over the weekend, including this morning. We had in-depth conversations about the medical literature, about the science behind the safety of vaccines. He referred me to studies and to people. I reviewed them and spoke to those whom he mentioned I should speak to. Now, the most notable opponents of Mr. Kennedy were pediatricians on the front lines of our children's health who regularly have to combat misinformation, combating vaccine skepticism with correct information that comes from their education, their training, and experience as physicians. They are aware of the falling vaccine rates and the inevitability of increasing hospitalizations and deaths of children from vaccine-preventable diseases. They are aware that children are now contracting diseases that they would not have contracted if the child was vaccinated. Now, I heard from others impassioned about the need to address chemicals in our food and a belief that we are victims of large impersonal forces maximizing profits while sacrificing our health. And there is evidence for that. Although food safety is principally a USDA concern, I strongly agree that this is an issue society must address. Other RFK supporters are concerned regarding environmental risk. They fear these risks are being ignored by authorities. Mr. Kennedy's history of environmental activism motivates their support. I pointed out that the Environmental Protection Agency monitors this, not the Department of Health and Human Services, but they still feel that he can make a difference. So as I looked how to resolve this, I returned to where I began. Would it be possible to have Mr. Kennedy collaborate in helping public health agencies re-earn the trust of the American people? Now, regarding vaccines, Mr. Kennedy has been insistent that he just wants good science and to ensure safety. But on this topic, the science is good. The science is credible. Vaccines save lives. They are safe. They do not cause autism. There are multiple studies that show this. They are a crucial part of our nation's public health response. But as someone who's discussed immunizations with thousands of people, I do recognize that many mothers need reassurance that the vaccine their child is receiving is necessary, effective, and most of all, safe. While I'm aligned with Mr. Kennedy as regards ultra-processed food, reforming NIH, and taking on chronic disease, once more, it leaves vaccines. Now, Mr. Kennedy and the administration reached out seeking to reassure me regarding their commitment to protecting the public health benefit of vaccination. To this end, Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed that he and I would have an unprecedentedly close collaborative working relationship if he is confirmed. We will meet or speak multiple times a month. This collaboration will allow us to work well together and therefore to be more effective. Mr. Kennedy has asked for my input into hiring decisions at HHS beyond Senate-confirmed positions, and this aspect of the collaboration will allow us to represent all sides of those folks who are contacting me over this past weekend. He has also committed that he would work within current vaccine approval and safety monitoring systems and not establish parallel systems. If confirmed, he will maintain the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices recommendations without changes. CDC will not remove statements on their website pointing out that vaccines do not cause autism. Mr. Kennedy and the administration also committed that this administration will not use the subversive techniques used under the Biden administration, like sue and settle, to change policies enacted by Congress without first going through Congress. Mr. Kennedy and the administration committed to a strong role of Congress. Aside from he and I meeting regularly, he will come before the Help Committee on a quarterly basis if requested. He committed that the Help Committee chair, whether it's me or someone else, may choose a representative on any board or commission formed to review vaccine safety. If he is confirmed, HHS will provide a 30-day notice to the Help Committee if the agency seeks to make changes to any of our federal vaccine safety monitoring programs, and Help Committee will have the option to call a hearing to further review. These commitments and my expectation that we can have a great working relationship to make America healthy again is the basis of my support. He will be the secretary, but I believe he will also be a partner in working for this end. If Mr. Kennedy is confirmed, I will use my authority as chairman of the Senate Committee with oversight of HHS to rebuff any attempt to remove the public's access to life-saving vaccines without ironclad, causational, scientific evidence that can be accepted and defended before the mainstream scientific community and before Congress. I will watch carefully for any effort to wrongfully sow public fear about vaccines between confusing references of coincidence and anecdote. But my support is built on assurances that this will not have to be a concern, and that he and I can work together to build an agenda to make America healthy again. We need a leader at HHS who will guide President Trump's agenda to make America healthy again. Based on Mr. Kennedy's assurances on vaccines and his platform to positively influence Americans' health, it is my consideration that he will get this done. As I've said, it's been a long, intense process, but I've assessed it as I would assess a patient as a physician. Ultimately, restoring trust in our public health institution is too important, and I think Mr. Kennedy can help get that done. As chairman of the Senate Committee with oversight authority of his position, I will do my best to make sure that that is what we accomplish. I want Mr. Kennedy to succeed in making America healthy again. His success will be tied to the health of our nation. He has the opportunity to address the most pertinent issues affecting Americans' health. We also need to reform institutions like FDA and NIH, and those, as already been indicated, are my priorities as chairman of the Health Committee. I look forward to his support in accomplishing this. If confirmed, I look forward to working together with Mr. Kennedy to achieve President Trump's mission of improving the health of all Americans. And with that, I yield.
The senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, I ask if we're in a quorum call.
We are not.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here this morning, now this afternoon, because in just a few moments, we will be asked to make a decision as to whether or not Congressman Doug Collins should be confirmed as the next Secretary of Veterans Affairs. I am speaking today to encourage my colleagues to make that happen. I believe caring for the men and women who have served our nation in uniform and for their loved ones they leave behind and for their families is one of our nation's most sacred obligations. We owe those who served all that they are entitled to and perhaps more. I remember making a commitment when I was in high school to express my gratitude and respect for those in uniform. I never envisioned being a United States chairman, I never envisioned being a United States senator, and now the chairman of the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, where our responsibilities are greater than just respect and gratitude. That's certainly important, but now we are here to make certain that all the promises we made to those who serve are kept. I want a VA secretary who understands the VA's mission. I want a secretary who will put veterans first. I want a secretary who recognizes the VA's importance in serving veterans and contributing to a safe and successful future for our nation. The success they had in uniform, I want them to have that success as a veteran, as a civilian, as a citizen. Congressman Collins is that person. Through his own service, which continues in the Air Force Reserve, Congressman Collins knows firsthand service in the uniform, and he knows the benefits and challenges that veterans face and the challenges their families face. In his testimony before the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, he demonstrated a significant understanding of the policies he will be expected to administer at the Department of Veterans Affairs and proved to me and to others that he is prepared to lead the VA into the future. He is committed to working closely with members of Congress and certainly the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs to make sure that our input is understood, taken into account, and hopefully implemented. His nomination was reported out of the committee in an overwhelmingly bipartisan manner. On a roll call vote, the vote was 18-1. I'm thankful for Congressman Collins' interest in serving in this capacity. I ask my colleagues to support his nomination, and I look forward to working with him to improve the lives of veterans, caregivers, survivors, and military families. Mr. President, with that, I yield the floor, but before I do, I ask that the vote scheduled at 12:15 occur immediately.
Without objection. Under the previous order, the clerk will report the nomination.
Nomination, Department of Veterans Affairs, Douglas Collins of Georgia to be secretary.
The question is on the nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell, Ms. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Mr. Collins, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis. Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Lankford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mr. Moran. Mr. Moreno, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida,
and the local United Way to open up seasonal tax preparations called the VITA program, Volunteers in Tax Assistance. Organizations all around the country train volunteers to help low and moderate income people do their taxes. And it was just the kickoff of this annual 21st annual event in the Fredericksburg area to help folks. And it was an opportunity to thank volunteers and to see those early bird tax filers who were there the first day to try to get their taxes in. Someone came up to me and told me that they were a veteran and that they had tried to log on to the VA portal that day to get a medical appointment and were shut out of the portal. Someone else heard the person telling me that story. The Fredericksburg area, about 50 miles south of DC, is very heavily populated with veterans. Others started to share their experience. It just so happens that we have just constructed, at the cost of $370 million, a new Veterans Clinic in Fredericksburg that's scheduled to open on February 28. Someone heard this discussion and said, oh, we hear the grand opening is going to be delayed because of a federal hiring freeze imposed by this administration. That conversation at this otherwise good news event started what has become a cascade of concerns that I've heard expressed by Virginians. Head Start programs not getting their monthly funding. Universities who are midstream on federal research projects being told that a funding freeze would prohibit them from drawing down dollars, thus jeopardizing the jobs of the researchers. Numerous federal employees who have been told that they are being reclassified from professional civil service to political appointee, where their future depends upon their loyalty to a person rather than their service of their fellow Americans. I was at church on Sunday. I go to a church that is a high percentage of Congolese refugees who are here under humanitarian visas or refugee status. Many of them are worried about the possibility of deportations because they happen to live in families where there might be mixed status. Some citizens, some green card holders, some refugees, others who are not documented. A Sunday school teacher at my church came up and told me that the Saturday religious instruction program that he holds at a nearby Catholic school, because there are a number of Latino immigrant families in that program, the attendance is down because families and kids are worried about ICE raids and deportations. Yesterday, I had two interactions with Virginians, one with local government officials and NGO CEOs, folks running domestic violence shelters, homeless programs, free clinics, et cetera, in the Richmond area where I live. And then a second meeting with the Virginia School Boards Association, elected school board members from all around the Commonwealth of Virginia, that was taking place in Alexandria, Virginia. And in each instance, I heard again and again this story: fear, confusion. Are our funds being cut off? Can we say anything about it? We are set up in such a way that we have served underserved populations. Are we allowed to do that now? And finally, Madam President, this morning I came into work and I had an email from one of the largest federally qualified health centers in Virginia, located in the Hampton Roads, 1.6 million people in the southeast portion of our state, Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Hampton, Portsmouth, Chesapeake, these communities. And they said, look, we are the healthcare safety net of first resort for a lot of low and moderate income people. And we've done this for years. And we receive federal funding. In fact, federal funding for most of our FQHCs is about 20 to 25% of their budget. They tend to get paid the last day of the month. Yesterday was the 3rd of February. They indicated they had not received their January payment. And when they were reaching out to determine whether they would receive the January payment or the February payment for that matter, they wouldn't even be given the courtesy of an answer. There is grave, grave concern about the numerous efforts that this administration has taken with respect to federal employees and with respect to the funding freeze. The funding freeze that was announced last week was partially retracted by the administration. It has been partially and temporarily enjoined in now multiple court cases. But as the email from this morning indicated, organizations who should be receiving funds, if the funding freeze is in fact enjoined, are still not receiving them. Obviously, we've got a lot of work to do to get to the bottom of this. The administration has not shared with any of us what their plans are. The analogy that I've used is it's like somebody has taken a jigsaw puzzle and dumped the pieces down upside down on a table in front of me. All I'm seeing is the cardboard backside. I don't have the box with the picture on it. Every time I talk to a constituent, a federal employee, somebody who works at a domestic violence shelter, a mayor, I can turn over a piece of the puzzle based upon what they're telling me. And as I turn it over, I can start to assemble what is in fact happening. And we need to do more to assemble it. And I just want to pledge to Virginians, I'm going to be doing all I can to make sure you're protected. But what I want to do now is read a letter that I have written and that I'm posting today on my website and disseminating publicly, specifically to federal workers. It is a letter that tries to honor them and give them a pep talk, and also direct them to resources that they can access in case they're concerned. And once again, Madam President, 140,000 of these workers live in my Commonwealth. Dear federal workers, as you're all too aware, we're in a dark time. The Trump administration has made plain that it wants to kick you around by blocking your ability to administer federal resources, censoring your free speech, locking you out of your workplaces, demonizing you in the press, and sending you ominous and at times threatening messages. These actions are shameful and harmful not only to you, but to the Americans across the country that you serve. But especially in the darkest of times, we must stay focused on finding our guiding lights. I hope you will let the call of service that you answered when you first swore your oaths as federal employees to serve as that light. My advice to you today is simple, even if it's not easy. Don't give up. Don't give up. Keep serving everyday folks. You are here because of your expertise. You are here because of your patriotism. You are here because you know the value in dedicating your life to serving your fellow Americans. America needs you, and that has never been clearer than in the wake of the administration's federal funding freeze last week. I heard from folks in every corner of Virginia about the invaluable support they receive from federal workers just like you. Across the country, Americans are counting on you to deliver crucial services, from inspecting our food to make sure it's safe, to protecting our national security, from administering Social Security benefits to staffing air traffic control towers, to supporting our allies around the world and keeping the influence of China, Iran, and Russia at bay. I know it has been and will continue to be tough. Donald Trump and cronies are determined to do anything they can to knock you off course. They've even dangled a phony buyout in your face. But make no mistake, that buyout is a trap. Donald Trump has no authority to offer you a resignation buyout. Don't trust a guy with a long history of stiffing contractors by taking him up on a sham deal that he won't follow through on. You aren't alone. I'm going to be here with you every day working alongside you in service. I want to share with you some specific ways in which I want to be a resource to you. On my website, kane.senate.gov, I am collecting stories from federal workers about what you are experiencing. Under no circumstances will I publicly share any information you send me without your consent. You can also choose to submit your information anonymously if you prefer. I will be updating my webpage with information that may be helpful to you, including summaries of your rights, recourse you can seek if you believe you are being illegally terminated, and answers to other frequently asked questions my office is receiving. Please know that I'm doing everything I can to stand up for you, just like you're standing up for and serving American people. Thanks for all that you do. And with that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
collaboration, and American principles. Madam President, no one likes to be left behind. I know somewhere people think there is this I win, you lose mentality. But what happened to let's grow the pie instead of just hoarding a few pieces that are left? Growth, not contraction, is the right solution. The world is more connected, not necessarily because of just because of globalization. We are now more connected because of technology, and nothing we are doing is going to stop that. The speed of information is empowering anyone with an internet connection, aided by the brain of an AI app, to get answers and ideas hundreds of times faster than ever before. Do we need new principles for the information age? Rules the world and we should strive to adhere to? I definitely agree. But Madam President, I thought we were for capitalism. Yes, capitalism in the information age needs better rules so markets aren't distorted, because markets need to be properly policed and they aren't right now. And I believe that the US should aggressively define the rules in the information age. I believe in a technology NATO, a model of key democracies and key sophisticated technology countries defining the rules of the information age and telling anybody who wants to follow that, we'll give you a discount on our technology, instead of those who are advocating to buy from people who have a government backdoor, or even in today's analogy, where you allow somebody to have a government backdoor to your technology. Madam President, capitalism is still the largest, smartest export America wants to export. We want open markets and we want more people to sell to. 95% of consumers live outside the United States. Now, it's clear not all the world community is down with capitalism, especially places like China or North Korea. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't continue to advocate for it. What has U.S. advocacy for capitalism done to grow and stabilize the world? I would say immeasurable, 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 immeasurable. In fact, the period from the end of World War II to the early 1970s is considered one of the greatest eras of economic expansion in world history. In the US, gross domestic product increased from $228 billion to just under $1.7 trillion in 1975. So whether it was Germany, Japan, South Korea, we have brought about a world economy because the shiny American dream was worth chasing. So whether it was setting market rules, growing exports, investing in innovation, this is the poster child of what the United States of America has been about. It has not been a story about contraction. It has been a story about growth. The impacts of the US economy can't be ignored, but to outcompete our adversaries, we need coalitions, not go-it-alone strategies. Why do we fear this if we think our principles are correct? But somehow, the current administration thinks that we've been hurt more than we've been helped in this global equation, and they want us to believe that somehow there is a win-win situation on tariffs that they can deliver on. The American people are demanding leadership here in Washington. They want us to work together. They want us to have the best interests of the country at hand. My guess is they think that on a global basis too. I know my farmers do. Farmers, always the big potential loser in a trade war, want us to work out better economic opportunities for their future. But there are those in this administration who think we can close our borders, chill trade with tariffs, and somehow make time stand still. Well, I got news for people. The information age has blown a hole in that theory, even if there was justification for the time standstill theory before the information age. You just cannot drop anchor in the middle of this storm. You need to get to a stable harbor and create an opportunity for the future. And trade, Madam President, not only grows economic opportunity, it helps change culture. And there are some cultures that are worth affecting. It's better to have a job than be attracted to join a terrorist organization. It's better to create economic stability than fueling poverty and migration. And tariffs are a distortion of markets. Tariffs mean we disagree. It very rarely means the disagreement will be resolved quickly. It usually means people will retaliate. And the escalation of that retaliation will hurt consumers so much so that eventually someone will blink. The payers in this dispute, though, are never the government leaders. No, it's the workers who lose their job. It's the family that pay higher cost. It's the community that lose their economic activity and tax revenue. And that is why it is so important in this day and age that we talk more about the 3 C's: collaboration, capacity building, and coalitions. Capacity building gives us the ability to accelerate innovation. Trust me, one thing I know about traveling my state, I'm sure it's true in other places too. Innovation is not only in the DNA of Americans, it is the history of our country. Whether electricity, aviation, or the internet, credit goes to the United States of America for innovation and inventing future economic opportunities, not just for us, but for the entire world. But now we are in an innovation race defined by AI and quantum. And according to the World Economic Forum, the United States generative AI may increase gross domestic product between $2 and $4 trillion per decade. Boston Consulting estimates that quantum computing could generate $850 billion in annual revenue by 2040. So are we going to focus on those things, winning the races? Or are we going to allow a contraction that hurts everyone? Obviously, going all in on AI and quantum can help ensure that our country maintains both economic and military advantages, but we definitely have to collaborate with like-minded nations who also want to grow AI and set the rules if you want to beat China's ultimate Belt and Road Initiative, DeepSeek. So what do we do about the domestic impacts of trade? Well, I can tell you some sure don'ts right away. You don't abolish the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program designed to protect impacted workers from trade, which is what has happened with the other side of the aisle. We need to be intentionally upskilling workers to help them in impacted sectors. I have met and talked to so many Americans. They are smart, talented, hardworking, striving, and they only ask for one thing: opportunity. If you bet on them, they will do the rest. I often think, Mr. President, of 2 major shifts in workforce policy in the United States. World War II, where we didn't have a workforce and the women showed up in the factories and delivered production. And when the men returned from World War II and everybody wondered what the economy of the future would be, and we gave them the GI Bill and they created it. So we don't cut workforce training. We invest in 2-year skill training programs at our high school. We make sure that we turn to apprenticeships. We return to the skilling of the jobs that are needed today. You also don't cut export programs like the State Trade Export Program, STEP, or the Export-Import Bank. But what do you do? Well, let's go back to those 3 C's: collaboration, coalition building, and capacity building. We will bring more high-wage manufacturing jobs back to the United States, fostering the investment landscape by continuing on the path of the CHIPS and Science Act and the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Those have put real investments in the United States of America and have started us on the path towards growing the middle class again. But we need to continue to invest in science. We need a robust R&D tax policy for inventors and manufacturers, and we need to help our manufacturers with capital investment, equipment modernizations to help them with their factories. I've seen this in places like Madison, Maine, or Longview, Washington, where we helped revitalize longstanding paper industry into new opportunities for the future. So how do we deal with China? Well, they aren't playing by the rule. They are manipulating and flooding markets. But I guarantee you that just a fear of China is not the answer. And solutions like collaboration and coalition building are critical, particularly in the information age. China does have the largest gross domestic product, about 19% of GDP. In the global economy, the US represents about 15%. But if the United States works to create markets with like-minded partners like Japan, Europe, and the UK, and builds a coalition of like-minded democracies grounded in the rule of law, we can flip the script and have a market representing 34% of GDP. And if we take the next step and expand coalitions to include partners like Canada, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, and India, then we're looking at a market that instead of China's 19% accounts for almost half, 47% of global GDP. So why aren't we focusing on that economic opportunity? A lot of people say, well, that's not the America of today. But I'm pretty sure Ben Franklin, about the time he was focusing on electricity, also went to France and helped build a coalition essential for the founding and continuation of our country. So don't tell me it's not in our DNA to do this. There is so much more we could and should do working with our allies. Obviously, I mentioned a few: research and development in artificial intelligence, commercializing quantum, scaling safe, affordable fusion technology. And there are many members of Congress who are working on these bipartisan ideas. But we have to remain competitive, and we cannot allow this debate about tariffs take us off our historical course as a nation. As I mentioned, we mapped out how to get investment in the United States of America. And now we need to follow that with the training and skilling of American workers. If the AFL-CIO president, Liz Schuler, and Microsoft president, Brad Smith, at a recent meeting in Seattle, agreed we need to train and skill 500,000 electricians for the United States, why can't we here agree and accelerate that? I'm not even sure we can agree on the acceleration of air traffic controllers, and we have every reason to get that done. Last week, I spoke about additional investments the United States needs to make in Panama, Latin America, and others to modernize bilateral agreements that help us counter China. And as I mentioned, I believe in an aggressive Ex-Im Bank investment to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative. Free trade agreements are a way for us, not tariffs, to gain the leverage we want. South Asia could play an important role in this coalition building, particularly in the Indo-Pacific region. But I want us to go further. I want us to understand that US-led negotiations in a Middle East free trade agreement to build on the momentum of a ceasefire in Gaza could further stabilize that region. That investments in other programs, and Mr. President, it's tragic that the administration fails to understand the important role USAID plays in capacity building. Mr. President, it is not a tariff-first approach world. It is an information age driven by rapid change where your partners, your friends, your supply chains, getting the innovation implemented and moving faster than your adversary is the key. How will we know that strategy works? Well, I suggest we will know when we're growing the middle class in the United States of America again. Mr. President, the bills we have passed in investing and allowing us to innovate faster are on their way to doing that. Let us not have a trade war disrupt that and dismantle what has been history after history lesson of economic success of this nation, fighting for open markets, capital opportunities, and investing in the ingenuity of America. I thank the President and I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
President,
The senator from California,
suggest we suspend the quorum call.
without objection.
Mr. President, on roll call, Vote 26. I voted nay. It was my intention to vote aye. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to change my vote since it will not affect the outcome.
Without objection.
Thank you.
The senator from Missouri.
Thank you, Mr. President. I stand here to amplify my support that I was able to give in the Judiciary Committee of Pam Bondi, who will hopefully in a few short hours here be confirmed as the next Attorney General of the United States of America. I want to thank, before I do that, the leadership and the hard work of Leader Thune and Senate Majority Whip Barrasso in this entire confirmation process, working at a clip that I think is responsible and one that honors the mandate that President Trump got to shake things up here in Washington, D.C. I think what you saw in November was a dynamic where people weren't particularly happy with what was going on in this town. And they voted for reform. And President Trump is putting together a team of reformers. And look no further than an ideal place for that reform than the Department of Justice. But before I get there, I do want to point out on a personal note that when President Trump announced that he was supporting Pam Bondi, I think I'd said to somebody, this was a home run. And as many of us in this chamber are often outdone by Senator Graham, he described it as a grand slam, touchdown, hole-in-one, ace, hat trick, slam dunk, Olympic gold medal pick, and he was right. I've known Pam Bondi for years from AG World. That was my job before I had this job. I was the Attorney General in Missouri, and Pam was always known as a leader and somebody that has this really rare combination of a steel backbone and a heart of gold. She's in it for the right reasons. She cares about the rule of law. She started her career from humble beginnings in a small town in Florida, and she wanted to be a prosecutor. We heard in her testimony in the Judiciary Committee that was her goal, was to be a prosecutor, and she spent hours and years in those courtrooms prosecuting the bad guys. And she later became the Attorney General of one of our bigger states. And as I mentioned, she was a leader. She defended the Constitution. She took on the opioid epidemic. She was relentless in taking on human trafficking. And somebody I think that everybody can look up to, not just from a personal perspective and her personal story, but also the way that she took on her job and had accolades from both sides of the aisle. There was actually somebody in the Senate committee who was on the other side of the aisle in Florida that ran for Attorney General the same time Pam Bondi was running for Attorney General and testified to her character. There's just no question that she's supremely qualified for this job. And we're really going to need somebody as the Attorney General to lead the Department of Justice who has that kind of integrity, who believes in the Constitution, believes in individual rights, and getting that department back to where it always should have been, which is fighting crime. Sadly, over the last 4 years, we have seen a Department of Justice gone astray. One that has made headlines, of course, for going after parents who showed up to school board meetings under the auspices of the Patriot Act, treating moms and dads as terrorists, who went to a school board open forum meeting and had concerns about things like critical race theory or forced masking. The full weight of the federal government honed in on parents and Catholics who were treated the same way because they were traditional Catholics, literally setting up informant networks and an effort to spy on them because of their religious affiliation. I'm not talking about the Soviet Union in the 1980s. I'm talking about the United States of America in 2021. What Merrick Garland did to this agency in the Department of Justice is a tragedy. Kash Patel hopefully will move out of the Judiciary Committee here soon and be the next leader of the FBI and restore integrity to that agency as well. But of course, the Department of Justice that Pam Bondi hopefully in a few short hours will be confirmed and then sworn in to lead will restore integrity. In addition to going after Catholics, and in addition to going after families who show up to school board meetings, the very coordinated effort of lawfare by the past administration to take out their chief political rival under the moniker of show me the man and I'll show you the crime can't be dismissed. They're not going to want to talk about that. But the effort to financially ruin President Trump, to literally throw him in jail for the rest of his life, deserves the scorn of the history books. Joe Biden gave a speech in the fall of 2022 calling half of America a threat to democracy, that President Trump would never make it back to the Oval Office, and guess what happened? A series of zombie cases with at best novel legal theories were resurrected. In New York, the number 3 person at DOJ left the Department of Justice to join the DA's office in New York. Why would that person want to do that? Well, guess what? President Trump was prosecuted in a Manhattan courtroom not long after that. In state cases, the number 2 person in the DA's office in Atlanta was coordinating with the White House counsel's office on the prosecution of President Trump in Georgia. And then Jack Smith was brought in, who was notorious among legal circles for overzealous and over prosecutions, overcharging, was brought in specifically to take out President Trump. And it was only the Supreme Court ultimately that prevented that. But this was all a scheme devised by the Biden administration to make sure President Trump never got back into office. Well, guess what? He stared it all down and he won. And we have a real opportunity now to have a level set. I don't think it's right that we have people pursued because of their politics from a criminal perspective. Nothing was out of bounds in the last 4 years by the Biden administration and Merrick Garland. So Pam Bondi is just the kind of person to come in, to restore integrity, to make sure that our Department of Justice is fighting on behalf of the American people and not an attempt, ironically, to undermine our republic, the very accusation that was leveled at Joe Biden's political opponent. And with that, Mr. President, I look forward to voting yes on Pam Bondi and having a real leader, somebody that we can look up to lead that very important Department of Justice. I yield back.
Mr. President,
The Democratic Whip?
are we in a quorum call?
We are not.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, last week I came to the floor to talk about the chaos that has been created by the announced proposed freeze on federal funding and loans. I want to share a few stories about what I've seen and heard since I spoke on the floor last week. Sharpsburg is near my hometown of Springfield, Illinois, and it has a water system in Christian County. It's in phase 3 of construction of a rural water project. 18 miles of pipeline, which will provide water. Excuse me. There's no excuse for this. Sorry. That may be a first on the Senate floor. I apologize. It contains 18 miles of pipeline providing water to 50 new rural customers. The work is underway. The project is nearly complete, and it'll be in jeopardy if there is a freeze permitted to take effect. What does it mean? It means that these 50 homes and families will be without clean, safe, and affordable water. That is unacceptable. The freeze also means that scientists at universities across the state are worried about their jobs and research. Parents of children with disabilities are worried about losing resources for their kids. Adults are worried about losing access to health care and social services. Since then, not one but 2 judges have issued temporary restraining orders blocking President Trump's measure. As of yesterday evening, that pause has been extended. But let me remind you, this freeze is unconstitutional. The Constitution gives the power to Congress, not to the president, the power of the purse. And the president has no legal authority to withhold funding that was signed into law for Americans on a bipartisan basis. In the 1970s, former President Nixon tried to impound or withhold funding appropriated by Congress, and in response, Congress passed the Impoundment Control Act of 1974, ICA. ICA is still the law of the land, and it prohibits presidents from withholding funds unless Congress approves the decision through outlined procedures. But consider this, the current administration apparently does not care. The president and his people are ignoring the law, creating chaos in hopes that amidst the confusion, some part of his power grab will stick. He is testing the limits of how much he can chip away at our system of checks and balances. There are reports that unelected Elon Musk and his, quote, government efficiency team now have access to the payment systems of the United States Treasury, which is essentially the checkbook of the entire federal government. Elon Musk tweeted to say he's planning to cut $4 billion in federal spending every single day from now till September 30th. $4 billion a day. I'm appalled to see so many of my Senate Republican colleagues falling in line as President Trump and Mr. Musk attempt to strip Congress of our constitutional authority and cause this kind of pain to our constituents. And I'm disappointed to see so many of my Republican colleagues vote to advance the nomination of President Trump's pick to run the Office of Management and Budgeting, Russell Vogt. If this funding stunt is any indication, he is not fit to run that office. The damage from the freeze extends beyond our shores. Bipartisan congressionally appropriated funds to provide life-saving humanitarian aid and freedom in places like Venezuela, Iran, and North Korea, have been ground to a halt. For example, programs like PEPFAR, started by President George W. Bush, and I give him credit for that, with the support of the evangelical community and its partner, the Global Fund, have dramatically curtailed the AIDS epidemic ravaging parts of the world. The program has saved more than 25 million lives. It has been so effective that some have forgotten just how devastating AIDS happened to be in that part of the world, killing more than 2 million a year globally, leaving 14 million orphans in sub-Saharan Africa. Further, USAID Clean Water and Sanitation have provided more than 70 million people with the first time sustainable access to clean water in the last decade. Programs that have a 6-to-1 return in dollars saved in health, economic, and educational terms. low-cost vaccination programs, eradicated smallpox, and almost eradicated polio from the face of the earth, something that was unimaginable just a generation ago. Food grown by American farmers helps save millions of lives when war or natural disaster strike. Gutting such programs puts innocent lives and American influence across the globe at risk. It is senseless, counterproductive, and ill-informed, and increases the likelihood of costlier interventions that don't respect borders, including pandemics, war, and failed states. The U.S. cannot and should not stand alone in the world. We are a global leader, and we have an obligation to continue to act like it. But over the weekend, in what sounded like a dystopian story from another world dictatorship, the Trump administration and Elon Musk tried to shutter the U.S. Agency for International Development without congressional approval. Try to imagine that disgraceful scene as one of the world's richest men gleefully guts programs for some of the world's poorest people. And don't be fooled. This isn't about reform, and the U.S. budget deficit won't be solved by gutting USAID. The foreign assistance budget is only 1% of our federal spending, a small, powerful investment that is not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do to prevent conflict and famine in failed states, as well as to build alliances and friends around the world. Gutting such programs is a betrayal of American values. Already nations like China sense a strategic opportunity. Under President Trump, when these programs go away, the Chinese will step in. Are Republicans going to roll over and cede congressional power to these bipartisan programs? I sincerely hope not. There's a lot at stake in the first few weeks of this new administration. I want to give the president a chance to show his values, but so far I have to tell you, there's a lot of disappointment. This temporary freeze hurt a lot of innocent people. And this notion now of shutting down USAID, I can't imagine Elon Musk would have it on his conscience that so many helpless people would lose the basics in life for his budget plan. He wasn't elected to anything. And I think we should return to the Constitution, which still guides us today and should. I yield the floor and suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Also Brooks.
Mr. President, today
Roll call
I would ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
without objection.
Mr. President, today we find ourselves in a pivotal moment in American history. And millions of Americans, by their actions or lack of action, will determine the future of our country for decades. In my view, the Trump administration is moving this country very aggressively into an oligarchic form of society where extraordinary power rests in the hands of a small number of unelected multi-billionaires. The Trump administration is moving this country very aggressively into an authoritarian society where the rule of law and our Constitution are being ignored and undermined in order to give more power to the White House and the billionaires who now control our government. The Trump administration is moving this country very rapidly toward a kleptocracy, where the function of government is not to serve the needs of ordinary people, but to enrich those who are in power. Mr. President, I think that today is a very good day to recall what one of our great presidents said at Gettysburg in November of 1863. Looking out at a battlefield where thousands of Union soldiers had just sacrificed their lives in the defense of freedom and the ending of slavery, Abraham Lincoln famously stated, and I quote, "The world will no longer remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did, the soldiers did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead, we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain." And this is how he concluded: "That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth." Government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Mr. President, I fear very much that under President Trump, we are not seeing a government of the people, by the people, for the people, but rather a government of the billionaire class, by the billionaire class, and for the billionaire class. And what is really interesting is that none of this is happening behind closed doors. It's not being done in secret. It's right out there for everybody to see. Several weeks ago, Donald Trump was inaugurated for a second term as president. Standing right behind him were the three richest men in America: Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Mark Zuckerberg. Combined, these three men are worth $920 billion. These three men own more wealth than the bottom half of American society, 170 million people. Three guys, 170 million people. And I should point out, and this should tell you exactly where we are going as a nation, these three men, wealthiest three in America, have become some $232 billion richer since Trump was elected a few weeks ago. Three guys, $232 billion richer since Trump was elected. Mr. President, this is how an oligarchic system works. Elon Musk, the wealthiest person in the world and now a key part of the Trump administration, spent over $277 million to get Trump elected. In other words, within a corrupt campaign finance system, which allows billionaires to spend as much as they want, he helped buy the election for Mr. Trump. Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg, the second and third wealthiest people in our country, both kicked $1 million each into Trump's inauguration fund. And let us remember that Mr. Bezos, who among other things owns the Washington Post, rescinded the endorsement of that paper for Kamala Harris just before the election. Mr. Bezos was showing early on that he was willing to bend the knee for Donald Trump. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and CEO of Meta, which owns Facebook and Instagram, agreed to settle a lawsuit with Trump for $25 million. These three multi-billionaires are working with Trump for one very simple reason. They understand that Trump's policies are designed to make the very wealthiest people in this country even richer. Since Trump's election, Mr. Musk has become $154 billion richer. Not bad in a couple of weeks' time. He earned a great investment. He only spent a couple of $100 million on the election, and now he's $154 billion richer. Mr. Bezos has become $35 billion richer, and Mr. Zuckerberg has become $43 billion richer. Mr. President, I am concerned not only about the growing movement toward oligarchy in this country, but I am deeply worried that under the leadership of President Trump, we are moving rapidly towards authoritarianism. And all over this country, people are alarmed and shocked by what they have seen in the last several weeks. Just a few examples, just a few. Last week, President Trump attempted to suspend all federal grants and loans in direct violation of the U.S. Constitution and federal law. As every third grader in America knows, or I hope knows, the power of the purse in the United States belongs to Congress, not the president. Yes, the president can recommend legislation to Congress. The president can veto legislation that Congress has passed. But he does not have the power to unilaterally terminate funding and legislation that has been passed by the U.S. Congress. That is a dangerous and blatantly unconstitutional act. And I should add that Trump's blocking of federal funding would have had a horrific impact on millions of Americans who utilize programs like Medicaid, Head Start, community health centers, Meals on Wheels, homeless veterans programs, and many, many other initiatives. Tens of millions of Americans, including some of the most vulnerable in our country, were impacted by that decision. But that's not all. A few days ago, Trump fired 17 inspectors general, independent government watchdogs that were created by Congress in the wake of the Watergate scandal to prevent the abuse of power by the executive branch. Last week, President Trump fired a member of the National Labor Relations Board, and in so doing, effectively neutered the only federal agency in America with the authority to hold corporations accountable for illegal union busting and to protect the constitutional right of millions of workers who want to join unions in order to earn better wages, working conditions, and benefits. Not only is that move blatantly illegal, it is exactly what Elon Musk, the owner of Tesla, and Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon, have been fighting for months. They don't like unions. And what Mr. Trump has given them is the opportunity to make it much, much harder for workers to organize in their companies. President Trump also illegally fired members of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the only independent commission in our country that protects workers against discrimination in the workforce. Further, and what should upset every American, no matter whether you're conservative, moderate, progressive, is that in direct violation of the Constitution and federal law, Trump is intimidating the media with lawsuits against ABC, CBS, Meta, and the Des Moines Register. His FCC is now threatening to investigate PBS and NPR. What Trump is essentially saying to every media outlet in America, if you say or do anything that is critical of me, that displeases me, you may be subject to a lawsuit or a federal investigation. If that is not a direct attack on the First Amendment, on the U.S. Constitution and free speech in our country, I don't know what is. But that is not all. Elon Musk and his unelected minions at Doge have forced out officials at the Treasury Department and illegally shut down USAID, a program which, among other things, helps feed and provide medical help to starving and desperate children all over the world. Presidents, much less unelected billionaires, do not have the unilateral right to shut down federal agencies established by Congress. And when we talk about the very dangerous movement towards authoritarianism that we are seeing in this country now, let us not forget Trump's pardoning of the January 6th insurrectionists who injured 174 police officers right here, right outside this floor. Even worse, not only did he pardon those people, but Trump is undermining the FBI by actually investigating the agents there who helped bring these violent criminals to justice. Imagine that. Pardoning the people who broke the law and investigating the people who upheld the law. That is not what America is supposed to be about. And Mr. President, under Trump, we are rapidly moving toward a kleptocracy as well. Just before the president was inaugurated, he and his wife launched their own cryptocurrency coins, giving them the potential to earn many billions of dollars. If Wall Street CEOs tried to bribe the president with a bag full of money, that would be illegal. That's against the law. But now they don't have to do that. Today, if a multi-billionaire, the head of a foreign country, wants to curry favor with the president, all they have to do is buy his cryptocurrency coins, and when they do that, they are directly enriching Mr. Trump. So, Mr. President, the question that millions of Americans are asking is, given the move toward oligarchy, given the move toward authoritarianism, given the movement toward kleptocracy, where do we go from here? What should we as Americans be doing? And let me tell you what I think and what most Americans think. And that is, instead of moving toward an economy which is designed to benefit the very richest people in our country, we have got to create an economy and a government that works for all of us, not just for Mr. Musk or Mr. Bezos or Mr. Zuckerberg. Mr. President, at a time of massive wealth and income inequality, we have never had more income and wealth inequality than we have had right now. It is beyond stupidity to provide more tax breaks to the very richest people in our country and then to pay for those tax breaks by cutting back on Medicaid and other programs desperately needed by working families all across this country. That is what we should not be doing. But let me take a moment to tell you what we should be doing. At a time when 85 million Americans are uninsured or underinsured in our broken healthcare system, we have got to do what every other major country on earth does, and that is guarantee healthcare to all people as a human right, not a privilege. That's what we've got to do. At a time when 1 out of 4 Americans cannot afford the outrageously high prices that the pharmaceutical industry charges, we have got to end the absurdity of the American people paying by far the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. We have got to cut the cost of medicine in this country in half, making it comparable with what the rest of the world is paying. Mr. President, the federal minimum wage today is $7.25 an hour. That is a starvation wage. Well, 60% of our people, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. We must raise that minimum wage to a living wage, at least $17 an hour. If you work 40 hours a week in the richest country on earth, you should not be living in poverty. Mr. Musk and Mr. Bezos want to make it harder for workers to join unions. Well, we have got to do exactly the opposite, make it easier for workers to join unions by passing the PRO Act. At a time when we need the best educated workforce in the world, we need to have the best public schools in the world. And among other things, that means we need to substantially raise teachers' salary. We need to attract the best and the brightest young people into education, and we do that, among other things, by making sure that no teacher in America earns less than $60,000 a year. We also radically reform our broken child care system so the little kids in this country get the quality care they need and the workers there are adequately compensated. Mr. President, all over this country, from Vermont to LA, we have a major housing crisis. And it's not just the 800,000 Americans who are homeless. It's millions of working families who are spending 40, 50, or 60% of their limited incomes on housing. Instead of spending almost $1 trillion a year on a wasteful and bloated Pentagon budget, we have got to build millions of units of low income and affordable housing. And when we do that, we put large numbers of American workers to work at good paying union jobs. Mr. President, I have heard time and again from Mr. Trump's supporters that the president won the election and he has been given this huge mandate, just an overwhelming mandate to do whatever he wants. Well, no president has the right to move us to oligarchy, authoritarianism, or kleptocracy. But more important, let us not forget that while Trump did win this election, he actually received 4 million votes fewer votes than Biden did in 2020 when Biden won the election. So here we are. Where do we go? What do we do? I think now is the time for the American people to come together, to not allow those who want to divide us up by the color of our skin or our sexual orientation or where we were born. That's what they want to do. They want to divide us up. Now is the time for us to come together like never before and make certain we do not move toward oligarchy make certain we do not move toward authoritarianism or a kleptocracy. And most importantly, in the richest country in the history of the world, we must understand that we have the capability of providing a decent life for all of our people. We can do that when we stand together and we don't let folks divide us up. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
Recognize the senator from Iowa.
Before I speak, I've been asked by leadership to make this request unanimous. I have 4 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
In a few minutes, probably shortly, I should say, we'll vote to confirm Pam Bondi as the Attorney General of the United States. Before we do, I'd like to speak in support of her nomination, and in doing that, urge my colleagues to vote for her, hopefully in a bipartisan way like we had for Garland under Biden administration. Ms. Bondi has been nominated to one of the most important offices in our country, and she's shown that she's up to that task. Her impressive record and presentation at her hearing are proof that she's ready to take the helm of the Justice Department. Ms. Bondi made history in 2010 as the first woman elected to be Florida's Attorney General. She held this role for 8 years after she was comfortably reelected by the people of Florida to that second term. 8 years of service as Attorney General of the third largest state in this union is excellent preparation for the role of Attorney General of the United States. As Florida's Attorney General, Ms. Bondi was a member of the Florida Cabinet, its chief legal officer, and led a very large agency. She handled many issues at the state level that she'll be handling at the federal level. And by all accounts, she's handled these jobs expertly. As Attorney General, Ms. Bondi didn't shy away from hard work or complicated problems. She engaged in an aggressive campaign to eliminate pill mills, take a leading role in securing a $303.25 billion settlement following the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, and eliminated the backlog of rape kits. She also stood for law and order and sought justice for victims of violent criminals. Her record shows then that she's highly qualified to be Attorney General of the United States. During her confirmation hearing, Ms. Bondi answered questions for more than 5 hours. What we learned during her hearing reinforced what we knew from her existing record as Attorney General of Florida. She's a tough, fair career prosecutor who built her reputation by enforcing the rule of law. Pretty simple. We also heard from witnesses who praised Ms. Bondi's character, fairness, and willingness to work with members of both parties to solve the problems in Florida. And we're sure she's going to work the same way as Attorney General of the United States. So what did we hear from these witnesses? We heard from an elected Democrat who never voted for President Trump. He said Ms. Bondi was fair, tethered to the rule of law, and could work with both Democrats and Republicans to serve the American people. We heard from Florida's statewide prosecutor who praised her competence running the legal department, as I've said, of the third largest state in the union. We heard from a Florida sheriff who testified about her commitment to law and order and to her partnership with law enforcement to keep Floridians safe. These witnesses have worked with Ms. Bondi for decades, and they all vouch for her capability and character. Ms. Bondi's nomination has also received a flood of support from all across America. So I have a group of people here that have expressed their view through letter to the committee. Law enforcement groups representing more than 650,000 officers wrote to urge us to support Ms. Bondi's nomination. A few of these groups included the National Association of Police Organizations, the Fraternal Order of Police, the National Sheriff's Association, major county sheriffs, National Narcotic Officers Association, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and still some others. This support is a testament to Ms. Bondi's history of backing the blue. We should all be backing the blue. I just met with some law enforcement people just before coming over here, and I tell every one of them, I'm not for defunding the police, and thank you for keeping the peace. We've also received letters of support from more than 100 former senior Department of Justice officials, scores of former U.S. attorneys, dozens of state attorneys general, women's rights groups, Second Amendment groups, and of course, others. Between her record, her presentation in committee, and the support she's received from across the country, I'm convinced that Ms. Bondi is the right choice. So, when confirmed, Ms. Bondi will take the helm of what we all know is a turbulent time, and also a Justice Department infected with political decision-making, and its leaders refusing to acknowledge that reality. In other words, political decision-making, at least on the 7th floor of the Hoover Building, overtaking the major role of the FBI, and the FBI is part of the Justice Department. They aren't putting first things first. So here are a few examples of political decision-making and infection in the department. Crossfire hurricane. Secondly, the Justice Department's targeting my staff. Yeah, that's right, my investigative staff, who at the time was investigating at my direction the government's abuse of Crossfire hurricane. Thirdly, cover-up of the Hunter Biden laptop story and sweetheart plea deals offered by the Department of Justice to Hunter Biden. Fourth, the FBI's inappropriate briefing to me and Senator Johnson during our Biden family investigation that was later leaked, and nothing's supposed to be leaked from what we call the SCIF. Fifth, Special Counsel Jack Lawfare's operation. In other words, trying to put now President Trump in jail. Sixth, the targeting of traditional Catholics, concerned parents, and abortion protesters as security threats. And seventh, the coordination of censorship of political speeches. And I don't have an 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th, but they exist. I'm not going to take your time on that. Now, all of these things that I mentioned, plus things I haven't mentioned, are very serious breaches of the public trust. And we can't tolerate that sort of breach. I'm confident Ms. Bondi will not tolerate that breach. And I'm looking forward to working with her to shed sunlight on these abuses. And sunlight, as some Supreme Court justice said, is the best attack against, oh my gosh, I forgot exactly what it was, but sunshine is supposed, coming in will really solve a lot of problems. This is the way I put it. I say we need more transparency in government, and transparency brings accountability. Now, I've already released new FBI records. In fact, just last week with Senator Johnson that show even more political violence biased within the Justice Department and the FBI. These records prove that former FBI special agent in charge, Thibault, a known anti-Trump agent, authored the initial language for what ultimately became Jack Smith's federal case against Trump regarding the 2020 presidential election. That case was codenamed Arctic Frost. Now, I don't know where they get the name Arctic Frost, but that's what the case was called. These records that we released last week showed a scheme in place between the Justice Department and FBI officials to get Trump. I had to rely on brave whistleblowers to uncover the truth because I was stonewalled by the Justice Department and the FBI. And I was stonewalled even after they promised at their own confirmation hearing that they would answer the letters that congressmen wrote them. We never got any answers. In fact, there's 58 answers in the last 4 years I've written to the FBI on my investigations that I have not gotten answers to. So, if you wonder why I'm so passionate about Pam Bondi, I'm confident that she's going to take a different approach, and she says yes for answering our letters. It'll be yes instead of what the other people should have said at the answer to that question is maybe. As the recent terrorist attacks in New Orleans and around the world have shown, we're faced with very serious threats to our national security. The president needs his team in place to protect our country, and the American people deserve a secure homeland and borders, safe streets, and orderly markets. We need to swiftly confirm a capable and top serious Attorney General to get to work. Now, I'm disappointed that none of my Democrat colleagues on the Judiciary Committee voted for Ms. Bondi in committee. I hope it'll be different when we get to the full Senate. We had a bipartisan vote, as I've said previously, for Attorney General Garland. Maybe on hindsight, we shouldn't have had, but we did have. There's no doubt that Ms. Bondi is highly qualified. In committee, several of my Democrat colleagues even acknowledged as much. She's qualified for the job. She represents mainstream views shared by at least the 77 million Americans who voted for change on November 5th. This should earn her the same bipartisan support this body gave Attorney General Garland, so that's the third time I've said that. My colleagues will not cross the aisle to vote for this qualified nominee, they'll show that Senate Democrats are intent on opposing President Trump's cabinet picks for purely partisan reasons, even at the same time they admit how fully qualified she is to do the job. So ending now, I say once again, I proudly support Ms. Bondi, look forward to confirming her. She's ready and able to serve our country well, and I know she'll work with President Trump to restore faith in the Justice Department. I urge all of my colleagues to join me in confirming Ms. Bondi. I yield.
Now I recognize the senator from New Hampshire.
Mr. President, I'm happy to be on the floor this afternoon with my colleague from New England, Senator Welch from Vermont. We are neighboring states that have been spooning for a very long time. But we're here today to talk about a very serious issue, and that is the tariffs that President Trump is talking about imposing on Canada, goods from Canada and Mexico, and the impact that will have on Americans. On Saturday, President Trump announced a 25% tariff, which would be a tax on imported goods from Canada and Mexico, and a 10% tariff, which would amount to a tax on imported energy from Canada, and on all goods from China. So 10% on all goods from China and a 10% on energy from Canada. He's also threatened universal tariffs on all countries. Now, thankfully, the tariffs that he announced on Canada and Mexico appear to have been delayed for a month, but the tariff taxes on China are now in effect. And even though many of these tariff taxes were delayed, they're still scheduled to go into effect next month, and they've created unnecessary panic and uncertainty among businesses and families across the country and in New Hampshire. Now, I want to point out in the beginning very clearly that it's not foreign countries who pay these taxes, these tariff taxes. It's Americans who pay these tariff taxes. These are tariff taxes on imported goods, meaning that the person or company who's importing the good will be footing the bill, and these costs will be passed on to American consumers and businesses. And you don't have to take my word for it. Best Buy's CEO said, and I quote, "The vast majority of that tariff will probably be passed on to the consumer as a price increase." And Walmart's CFO said, "There will probably be cases where prices will go up for consumers." Columbia Sportswear's CEO said about tariffs, "We're set to raise prices, and it's going to be very, very difficult to keep products affordable." Now, if we look at the cost of just the tariff taxes that were originally announced on Saturday, those would raise costs for the average American household by more than $1,200 a year. And if we get into a trade war with increasingly high tariffs on both sides, and that's what it appears could be happening with China, those costs will go up even more. Now, President Trump campaigned on a promise to lower prices for everything. The tariffs that he's talking about would have the exact opposite effect. I'm glad the administration and the president listened to reason. He delayed the start of these tariffs, but I hope we don't have to be back here in a few weeks making this case again. And I want to make sure that people understand what these tariff taxes would do and highlight some of the areas where Americans would be directly affected. First is energy. America imports more oil and gas from Canada than from any other product. In New Hampshire, more than half of the gas in people's cars comes from Canada. These tariff taxes would make gas prices go up, and they could even lead to supply shortages because refinery and delivery infrastructure just doesn't turn on a dime. President Trump's new 10% tariff tax on energy from Canada would also directly raise the cost of keeping warm for Granite Staters during the coldest months of this year. In New Hampshire, our #1 import from Canada is heating oil. And nearly 250,000 households in New Hampshire, that's about 40% of our households, more than Vermont, I think, Senator Welch, rely on fuel oil to heat their homes. We're the second highest state in the nation, next to Maine, who relies on #2 heating oil to heat our homes. Another 100,000 Granite Staters rely on propane, and about 30,000 homes use wood. So that's about 60% of New Hampshire that relies on delivery